Looking from a distance, we see no boundaries or borders between nations. People simply belong to the land they live and work on. Whether they were under Roman, Ottoman, or British rule, the people of Palestine lived in their towns and villages, working their land and doing their best to feed their families. This is the house my father was born in. I recently went back there to see this house. It no longer belongs to my family. Today it is an office for Israeli television. My family did not sell this house or give it away. They were driven from it at gunpoint in 1948. I was born in America to parents that came from two very different worlds. This is a story about my family and where we belong.
Well, during the Depression, so many people lost their jobs. And my father had just graduated from the university with his master's degree in electrical engineering. His job just vanished. Then I remember we had to leave our apartment, and we were always scavenging for food. My mother knew what kind of mushrooms one could eat, so we would pick mushrooms. We fished for frogs and ate frog legs at night over the fires. They were cooked over the fires. And then one day my father got the idea of building a trailer for us. So I remember living in the trailer, and I remember particularly traveling with the goat that my mother got for us. Then as it got cold, they gradually, drove south. And my father met someone who was selling blankets that were made of paper mill felt. The felt that was worn out in the paper mills, he took and cut into lengths and bound and dyed. And he sold this business to my father, and that's how my father fed us, by selling blankets as we traveled. And we came to Michigan to the county park. They liked it so much, the lake and the whole situation. So they found a house to rent, and we lived there. I remember in the winter, one winter we lived there through Christmas. And then they had a chance to buy a house on the lake, which was pretty rickety. I think it was mostly built out of driftwood that they'd hauled up from the beach or something. I remember the first time I saw it, the floor had completely separated from the top of the house. And as soon as they got it slightly together, we moved into it. I do remember in the winter the rug used to blow up off the floor when the wind would blow off the lake. One night at the end of the month, and they had bought this house and they were paying for it $10 a month. And one night they just didn't have the money for the next payment, and they were very worried. And someone knocked on the door and bought 2 blankets, which paid for the rent. So it was hand to mouth for a long time. He started working as an office boy, and then they realized that he knew about drafting and things like this, so he had a job doing this kind of work for a long time. And then one time he got an idea for a new invention, which he developed, the lift truck, and was a big success. After that, he had plenty of jobs.
I loved movies. I loved to go to movies. But it turned out to be an escape for me, to as if shield myself from what was going on around me. And because we didn't have much money, nothing, no money actually. So I found a job. I found a job with the Red Cross. And the Red Cross were at the Augusta Victoria Hospital. They had started working with refugees and Palestinians who were sick, etc., injured. So I worked with them. And they gave me 10 dinars a month. That was really a good amount of money, which I took. When I took it, I ran to my father and gave it to him to buy food. I wanted to go to America. I always thought of really, because I heard about America, that you could go and work your way through. You could work as a waiter, you could work as anything, but you can go to school and work, or work and go to school. So there were two things that I want to take immediately. One, to take a visa, and two, to approach someone and borrow money. I went to the American embassy and I applied, and they gave me a visa. That was a big thing in my life. Visa to go to America. Now I can go to America. The question is that how to go there. I don't know how I heard about a businessman in Amman. I said, Abu Abdullah, I have come here. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell anybody. But I want to go to America. I have the visa and I have the acceptance at school. The only thing is that I need the passage money. I will work and study, and I will send you the money. And I need 400 dinars because the ticket is 360. And he looked at me and he said, but this is a large amount of money. I said, I will pay you. And when that happened, I felt that, look, one can really get anything that he wants if he believes in what he wants, if he works towards it, if he insists, he gets there. Ammi Nabil, I remember, had a very favorite yellow sweater. That morning when I had to leave, he gave it to me. It was, one of the possessions that he had. He was so proud of it. He wouldn't wear it unless it's an occasion, the Eid or something like that, and he gave it to me. I remember I got a bag. It was broken down, put whatever clothes in it, put the yellow sweater also, and tied it with ropes. And next morning I had to leave. When I got to America, I had $5 in my pocket. And he looked at me and he said, what, the customs man or whatever, what are you doing, where are you going? I said, to university. They put me in Ellis Island for 6 days. They took me from Ellis Island to the one of the streets, me on there with my bag. That was the beginning of America.
Mary Louise was married to an Arab man, and Mary Louise and her brother were very good friends of my brother. And she knew that this American Friends of the Middle East in Chicago needed someone to work as a secretary, and she suggested that I try for the job. You know, I was interested. I had no idea where Palestine was or anything about it. And I certainly found out a lot. And we used to give big parties. I would cater them. I'd cook the lamb and arrange for all the different things to be done. And then we had parties for the Arabs, parties for the Afghans. And he had come up to Chicago for the summer to work. And they used to come and hang around the office and have tea in the afternoon. We served cookies and things. And they were kind of hungry. They didn't have much work and they were having a hard time, so they would come in and have tea in the afternoon. And I was quite impressed with him. I was 24 years old at that time, and very romantic, thinking this would be exciting, you know, to marry an Arab and go and live in the Middle East. And so there I was, living in exciting times. One of the first things when we got married that I had to get used to was listening to the United Nations Assembly on Palestine every night while I was trying to go to bed to sleep. Night and morning early, one listened to see if there had been some resolution. Terrible.
I remember that I used to watch I Love Lucy, and I just thought it was a show about my parents because, you know, Ricky was dark and he had an accent, and Lucy was kind of silly. I just was amazed at how they had made a movie about Dad and Mom. And I remember C.D. coming and visiting us, and I remember that we went to the airport to get C.D., and I was with Dad, and Dad had on a long overcoat, and it was cold, and I was little, you know, looking up at Dad, and suddenly when C.D. started to come down the stairs, a big tear came out of Dad's eye and fell, and he caught it with a handkerchief real fast and put the handkerchief in his pocket. It was the only time I've ever seen him, well, until much later, it was the only time I'd ever seen him cry. Just one big tear, you know, when he saw C.D.
I have reached what I wanted in America. Now what? And that was another big challenge. The challenge was, should I stay here?
Despite doing well in America and achieving his goal of becoming a university professor, my father longed to go back home to Palestine. So in 1964 he decided to move his family to Jerusalem with the hope that his children would grow up in the land where he belonged.
I think I was 7 years of age when I became aware of Palestine. I recall when I was 7, they sent me to school. And coming back from school, one of my first memories was that there was a commotion in the streets, etc., and people were shouting. Then I understood that the Arabs were revolting against the British mandate in Palestine, because the British were in Palestine after World War I. And the Arabs, you see, felt then that the British were helping Jews to come into Palestine illegally and encourage them to start building settlements in Palestine. So the Arabs revolted, and that was known as the Palestinian Revolt of 1937. We were living really with the Jews in a very cordial manner, in the sense that they were our neighbors, they were our friends at school, and I had a very good friend who was Jewish. His name is Joseph Schiff. We were very, very good friends. This situation was very normal. And we never thought of really having people come into Palestine and take it over, for instance, as growing up. Because we knew that Palestine is an Arab city. In school, for instance, they used to take us on trips to Jaffa, to Haifa, to Bisan. It all was Arab. You could hardly see Jews. Now, the big problem, I think, began when as I said, that we started hearing the bombs going up, the Jews killing Arabs, the Jews killing British soldiers. That began really a new stage, in the sense that we became much more aware of the danger or of dangers. The problem is that the Jews became a danger to everybody. They killed people in the coffee house that I have seen. They killed many more people. They shoot buses. They would kill British soldiers, etc. And we knew that these people have come from abroad to take over Palestine. One day, I was playing with my friends, and we heard shots and shouting. So I ran from the house to the street, to the Jerusalem, Jaffa Street, they call it. It wasn't very far from our house.
We had like a coffee house, people sit outside and they use the argila, and there were many men sitting on this coffee house, outside the coffee house, from our village.
My grandfather used to go to it, but fortunately that day he did not go.
And the car came, because we were playing around that area, and from the window they shot about 7 of them. And the car kept going fast, very fast.
When I got there, they were all lying down in blood and shouting, and I recall very, very well how the smell, the very bad smell with the gun smoke, all that and stayed with me.
That I remember. And then I remember when they brought them to the village or to the area, they were lying down all dead. I remember some of their faces even.
The Arabs, the Palestinians, did not accept the fact that their country should be partitioned. And they said, why would the United Nations give half of Palestine to the Jews?
The things I remember is that they were saying that the Jews are coming, or the Israelis. There were no Israelis, then there were Jews and Arabs. And that the Jews were coming, and they were supported by the English. Nervousness and tension, and although I was very young, but I was aware that there was something wrong, you know.
So one day, a knock on the door. So I went, opened it. And there was a Jewish, maybe colonel or whatever, sergeant, I don't know. And behind him there were three, and they all had Sten guns. And he said, where is your father? So I went and called my father, who came really. I remember in his pajama and in his robe, with a babouche and his slippers in his feet. And he was very concerned. I mean, I could see his face. After perhaps 15 minutes or so, he came, but his face was really white. So I went to him, I said, so what is wrong? What's going on? And he said, well, look, you have really all to get ready to leave the house. Because these Jews came and they said, we have to move from here. Otherwise, they are not responsible for what might happen to us. Like Deir Yassin, for instance.
I must say there was a lot of tension, that one wasn't safe. You know, you could really feel that you're not safe, there is something wrong going on.
I went to my mother and I said, you know, you have to get ready, we have to leave. She said, I'm not going to leave. I will not leave. I said, look, these people will kill. I mean, we have to go. He said, why don't you go, Yamma? Go and I'll stay here. I'll take care of the house. So, you know, we had such a hard time in getting her really to go. She started crying. I recall that. And then she went around the house, closing the windows.
And he said, prepare yourself, we have to leave. My mother objected. She said, no, I will not leave, but my father insisted that we should leave. But that time, the Jews closed the boundaries between East and West Jerusalem.
I could tell that there is something bad going on because of my father's, if you like, worry and concern and telling everybody to rush around and come and go, and people were, you know, rushing. One thing I remember is that nobody carried anything. One of my sisters wanted to take her, I think, school bag or something, and they told her not to because there wasn't time.
And my mother was the last one to leave, and she locked the other steel door, and she got the second key, and she put them in her bosom pocket. And she was crying. And she said to my father, she said, when we come back, we have to do something about this window, which is broken. Something like that.
And then they put us in this pickup, like, in the back of it, all of us. That's 9 of us, and my father and mother, and my grandmother.
So we got in the truck and we started leaving. And we had to cross Jewish quarters. And looking around the Jewish quarters, there were these armed young Jews standing around, and we were most afraid, I remember.
Of course, we were going away to come back because, we just closed the door and my mother took the key, put it in her dress. And to me, it was we going and coming. And that's how many years ago? Since 48. A long time. And we're still waiting.
The head of the American colony, Vester, he was my father's friend, and he took us as guests there. Then the Jews started shooting at the American colony. It was not safe.
My father was very concerned that we moved to a safe place, away from the shooting, because the shooting was coming nearer and nearer. You could hear it louder and louder, and people were running away,
The safest place was to enter the gate, the old city. We went there and we stayed there inside, thinking that the bombs would not come to us.
My father, being the director of the water supply in Jerusalem, all his life he was the director of the water supply. He knew the sheikh of the, what they called the Indian corner, Zawiyat al-Hanud in Arabic. So he went to him and they talked and talked and talked, and then suddenly my father said, "We have a place."
And then I remember from that time, I was old enough to remember now, when we were in Bab al-Zahra, we went to Aizariya. We ran away that night because it was too much bombing in Jerusalem, and my father said, "We better go." Went to the Aizariya. The same night we left, a bomb hit the house. And we were in Aizariya for about nearly a year.
And that was the beginning of the first uprooting, because I felt that we were uprooted. And you see, to me, I often thought of how my friends, the places I played in, the woods, Micha, Joseph Schiff, all these things, as if I wanted really to hold on them. I didn't want them to, go disappear or let go of them, And the whole atmosphere, the whole environment that we were in, there were so many refugees, people carrying their children on their backs, and some of them crying, women crying, children crying. There were flies all over. And from time to time, of course, we heard those shootings going on. It was such a terrible time.
We didn't have much of schooling that time. You go to a school for a few months and then closed. And then because of the war, shooting and killing and all the time.
So I remember I would go to the nearby fields and get some warak inab, the leaf. And I'll bring them in. And we'll eat them like that. And some grapes if I found some. There were, it was miserable because there were no bathrooms or something, or anything like that. So, people had to use the open spaces, really.
In a way, the teachers even don't have time for give you the right education, simply because of the war. I mean, you are sitting in a classroom and then shooting started, and you just don't want to be hit. And sometimes you're walking the street, going to school or coming from school, and some bomb fell over somewhere, and then you see the bodies of some people dying, women, children. There was no mercy at that time. A lot of my friends were died, you know, some of them injured, some of them died, some of them. But it was, in a way, it was bad memory. I don't wish it for anybody, really, to go through what we have been through.
I remember being at school when we went to St. George's. I remember very well, actually, that there was a big shoot-up between the Jordanians and the Israelis just behind our school. And the Israelis started coming across the border, and they shot about 6 of them inside the borders, Israelis. And we were all terrified, the students. I mean, we were under the desks and everywhere. And then when the shooting stopped or eased off, we were told, go home. As we were going home, I remember seeing 6 soldiers. But what amazed me really is when I got home, which I had to go walking, which is about 5-6 kilometers, I heard on the news that there was a shooting happened behind the St. George's School, and that 2 Israelis were injured.
2?
That's all. And I saw the 6 with my own eyes. And that was the beginning of me wondering what's really going on, you know. Something you see and you hear different. And it's been like this since. You hear something and you see something else.
We thought, you know, after a while, things will settle down and we will go back. I mean, that's why my mother carried the keys, because she carried them because she is going to go back and open the steel doors.
I keep telling her, Mom, take off this key from your pocket from her too. Said, Scotty, we are going back home. My father, I don't forget. Before he died, we used to go to Rumema. He used to go and see the houses. When he used to see the house, he used to sing for it. You sing, you are here and we will come back to you. I took my mother, she kept telling me, no, we are going back, we are going back. I said, it's too much for her to keep thinking haram. I told her, do you want to go home? Shall I show you home? She said, yes. We went. I went with her in an UNRWA car. We went to the house. Do you remember when I told you Sitti used to sit here? She sat there. A neighbor, a Jew, from the balcony, she said, what are you doing here? Sitti told him, this is my house. She told her, you have no house here. This is no more your house. Not a word, she said. She took off the key, put it in front of the door, and we left. Then she died.
It was always terrifying, I think. But I think I learned to kind of, to the extent that you can get used to something like that, I got used to it. I remember one time, the Israelis used to have convoys between Israel and Mount Scopus, because they had this thing on Mount Scopus. And what they would do is that they had these heavily armored vehicles between tanks, and they would go slowly, through Jerusalem and up there. And I remember being in St. George's School with the tanks going by, the Israeli tanks, and all these boys throwing rocks at the tanks. I didn't dare throw rocks at the tanks. I didn't want anybody just even thinking that I was, any kind of problem. I didn't want to get blown away on behalf of anybody. I wanted to get the hell out of there, go to America or wherever it was peaceful.
I was pregnant with Amal, and Sari had tried to, on Saturday, so we could see the war coming. And on Saturday, Sari had gone down to buy tickets for me to leave with the children, to leave the country and go to America. And when he came back, I was in labor. So, as Jamil said, Mama, you'd do anything to stay with Dad.
Anyway, I remember I was sitting on the porch, probably it was around 10 or 11 in the morning, and I was reading a book about a magic elephant and enjoying it very much. I was looking forward to a nice, quiet, long summer vacation.
And I remember it was the first full day out of school, because I remember feeling so happy about it, Chef. And it was a nice day, and sun was out, and it was quiet.
Dad, he left every morning to go to drive to Amman to teach.
I took the car and I went to the university. I had the radio on. As soon as I got to the gates of the university, before entering, I heard that war broke between the Israelis and the Egyptians. So immediately I turned the car and I rushed back. It was so quiet, nothing in Jerusalem, nothing, just so quiet. And I told myself, I said, this quiet is before the storm.
Suddenly Dad pulled into the driveway like a bat out of hell and jumped out of the car and ran up the thing.
I saw Sari coming back from work driving lickety-split, and he came rushing up into the house and said, I'll give you 5 minutes or 3 minutes to get out of the house. He said the Israelis have attacked Egypt and they'll be here, so we have to leave.
I don't know what I thought it was, but I remember I grabbed my riddle book, Cheyenne. It's the riddle book that Grandma sent me. And Jamil grabbed a chemistry book that was like a high school chemistry book. And Mom grabbed some diapers, I think. We all went out to the car.
So I remember they just grabbed anything they could. I remember Dad taking a whole box of birdseed, and we had 2 parakeets, I think, and just pouring the whole box of birdseed onto the bottom of the cage. It's the kind of thing that, you wouldn't normally remember to do.
So I rushed next and tried to get, a few warm clothes and things for you kids, and your dad did the same thing.
So she got things together, put it in the car, and went to the family house. Now, as soon as we got to the family house, shooting began.
Everyone was there except Amti. People kept arriving because they had, the news, people had heard the news. They were coming back from their various jobs.
I remember very well. It was a Monday. It was a Monday when we had notifications from the government house, UNTSO, telling the director that they have to pay us 1 month advance and let the employees leave immediately. They told us the Jews are entering Jerusalem. And the war started.
I remember at Sidi, everybody was there, and Sidi was smoking, and Dad was smoking, and Nabil was smoking. They were all smoking, and they were, everybody was listening to the radio, and they were all looking at the road.
Everyone was in a turmoil, trying to decide what to do. Your dad's idea was to drive to the borders of Jordan and leave. But his sisters hadn't come from work, and everyone was worried about them. They were waiting for their sisters. Finally, Sari decided that there just wasn't time for us to drive.
I remember going around the house with them and them talking, very animatedly, what should we do, what should we do? And in fact, we went into the back storeroom, Sitti's storeroom that has things from, circa, 1100 AD in there and all this, to try to see, could we hide in there, Because they knew, having been through this after every meal, since 1948 and so forth, they knew that you needed to find a place and so forth. So finally, we decided that we would go to the St. John's Eye Hospital, which was just a few blocks away, and in fact, we could see it from our house. And I think that the feeling was, it's run by, I think it was the French or the English or someone, and that it'll be safe there because the Israelis won't come and, massacre people or whatever. Because, having, everybody, no one knew what the Israelis would do if they came, or who would win, or what would happen. Would we all be killed? Nobody knew. So Amti Lamia had not yet come, though. So we waited for her, and then I think we started to hear some shots far away, You know how they start, a few shots here and a few shots there. Somebody gets a little trigger happy, pretty soon it all adds up and you've got a big shooting war going on. But anyway, we just got in the cars and we drove there. I remember Dad telling us to get down.
It was just one of those, it was like you see in the movies where people are just driving this way and that way and frantically turning back and forth. And we drove to the hospital and went in the courtyard. Then after they got us safely settled, Sari and Nabil went back to get their mother, who refused to leave the house until she had taken the horse and what did she have? The horse? She had to take the horse to the neighbors, and she wouldn't leave her cooking. So when they got to the house, the shooting started from the Israelis, because our area was the first area that the Israelis entered Jerusalem. And their mother came running out of the house carrying this big pot of warek dawali and jumped in the car. They had no trouble encouraging her this time, and was lucky she brought the food, because it was about the only thing we saw for a couple of days in the way of food.
While I was in class, the war started. We came back from Jericho. There were no cars. Someone was leaving. I asked him to take me with him. He took me with him. I said, please drop me here. This road was further away. I said, drop me here. He said, I can't. There's too much shooting, and I can't drop you here. I said, where will you drop me? He said, I'm going to find a covered place to drop you there. So he dropped me near Shafat. I started to walk. Then I started to crawl, because they were shooting over my head. The Jordanian army had dug trenches so they could hide in them, so I crawled in them. After a while, some of our Lifta neighbors called to me to hide with them, but I said no, because if I went and got stuck, I wouldn't have been able to get home. So when I got home, I found a note telling me they were in the eye hospital. So I went and called all the way to the eye hospital.
And she finally came, and she was sobbing hysterically because she had come to the house, apparently it had taken her longer, and then there's this note, there was nobody there, and she had to crawl through the ditches and so on, and she was just hysterical.
So we're put in the basement where the central heating motors and all these are found.
And I remember the first things the aunties did is they had a bunch of clothes with them and they stuffed them in the windows, in the window holes, so that, we thought this was very strange, but they stuffed them over the windows so that you wouldn't have flying glass.
We were trying to rest, trying to lie down, trying to calm the children and get them to sleep. And about 7 bombs, had 7 direct hits on the building of bombs. It was pretty scary. And I remember thinking, well, at least we're all here together, there won't be anybody left over. And people started pouring in. I mean, there were several hundred people in the basement, I would think, in a long corridor in the basement.
You should have seen the way it looked. Everybody was on top of each other. All the neighbors, all the people were there. They came to the shelter at the hospital and there was no food.
We stayed down in that basement, and then it really started up, And I remember that you and I and Laith, we played, and stuff. And I remember that to your mind, after a while, it just seemed like that there was a thunderstorm going on outside. That was the way your mind kind of, because there's all this booming and crashing and, and to your mind, it just seemed to me, I would be playing and so forth, and I would just have this feeling that there was a thunderstorm going on outside. That was the way that, I sort of, and then every so often I would realize, oh, it's fighting, Most of the people were either in the rooms or in the hallway, like sleeping maybe on the floor, or like sitting, or they would sleep along the wall or whatever. So Dad and I were taking a walk. He said, let's go for a walk. We took a walk down the thing. Suddenly, we got a direct hit, and all the lights flashed, and the glass all smashed out of the windows. I remember that the glass just all went pew, and I was like scared, So I looked up at Dad, and Dad just looked down at me, and he smiled and winked, like, hey, this is, something, huh? And then I wasn't scared. He was an extremely brave guy and isn't scared of anything. And he did me the great favor of conveying to me as a little boy that courage, at least for that time, by just giving me a wink. And, it's like, and everybody screamed. That was part of what just made me scared, because I thought, oh, all right, there's something to scream about. But Dad didn't even blink. He just gave me this little wink and smile, like, and then I wasn't scared.
I went into labor again, and I was feeling very poorly. The Spanish council was on one side of me in the basement, the French council on the other, jumping up and down and juggling me, and there was no place to lie down or relax. So finally, my brother-in-law, Nabil, and Sari told the head nurse that I was in labor, I was going to have a baby. And she said, oh my goodness, now where will we put her? What shall we do?
There started to be banging on the door at the end of the hall. And by this time there was less fighting. And everyone was just terrified because they knew that the Israelis were here and were trying to get in.
Suddenly, Mom grabbed my arm, Shaf, and her nails dug into my arm. And she was crying, Shaf. And she suddenly told me, she said, go stand over there, in other words, behind the corner. And if you move, I'll slap you so hard, you won't know which end is up, Shaf. And suddenly, Shaf, first thing I thought that was just so unfair, Shaf. Number one, I wasn't doing anything, Shaf. Then I realized that there was something very bad going to happen, Shaf. I went and stood in the corner, Shaf, there, and Jamil was there, and he had this expression on his face, like a defiant expression on his face, Shaf. And I was crying and crying, Shaf. And Jamil said, why are you crying, Shaf? And I told him, we're all going to die. And Jamil said, so what?
Suddenly all these soldiers came down. I remember them coming down like this. A lot of dust flying after them. And we all retreated to the end of the hall. And Sari, I remember he took my hand. His hand was so cold. He must have been frightened as well. And he said, look, this is all the money I was able to get. Take this money and keep it with you in case, you know, of trouble. Because he was afraid that they'll take him away or shoot him or something, and then we'll be left alone.
And I remember everybody being so frightened at that point, because I remember everybody stood up you could hear somebody coming down the stairs, and everybody stood up.
And the Israelis came in, and they were just like these young guys. They were looking around like this. They obviously were worried that there were some fighters or soldiers or something there. Obviously, the Israelis had taken over. I remember the Israelis coming in and insisting that all men, except the doctors, had to come with them. So Dad pretended to be a doctor with Ami and Nabil, and they started looking at people like this, and Dad started to look at people's wounds and injuries and this and that. But then at some point they made him go outside, and you know, I was really scared because I thought, well, what are they going to do? You know, for all that we knew, they would take them away or kill them or whoever, you know, whatever. I mean, the Israelis among us had a bad reputation. But what they did was they just had them go outside and kneel down, because I guess they were afraid that, you know, they just wanted to keep control of all the males who might rise up.
My concern, of course, about my family, about the sick people, about my sister-in-law, like I said. I mean, it was a combination of so much. You get from one difficulty, you get to the other difficulty.
Then I was taken up to a room on the first floor. It was on a kind of an air shaft. It was a closet of some sort for linens. And they put a bed in there, and I went up there with Ami Nabil.
Some people went to hysterical fits, some people start vomiting, some people they start shouting. But my concern was about them, it's true, but on my sister-in-law, because you see the complications which might occur in my sister-in-law was too grave if anything should happen.
I was so miserable with cramps and labor. I was so exhausted, I remember. He would make me walk around the bed and then lie down. I couldn't walk anymore. I'd lie down, fall asleep instantly, and then he would be shaking me, get up, because the contractions would stop.
So I called the nurse from downstairs, and I gave her a torch. I told her, look, all what you have to do, light where you see my hands. She did at the beginning. I started to deliver her, I delivered the head. Then suddenly the light is gone. I was left in the dark. I have no choice, because already the head was out. And they have to bring out the rest of the girl, not only her head, the rest of her out, in order to at least see that everything is all right. But my main worry was about the mother.
Then when I finally had the baby, I had quite an audience of soldiers and people outside the door. I was trying not to yell too loud, but it was quite nerve-wracking, having a baby and a war at the same time. I felt sad to have a baby right then. I said, what a hard time to have a baby, and what a hard future for a baby. And the poor baby tried to quiet her. She kept crying and crying, and of course she's my fourth child, so finally I just put her in a little apple box that we had fixed for her, little carton, and put her down on the floor next to my bed, and I fell asleep. And I heard a noise. I woke up, and there was this Israeli paratrooper kneeling down. He had the baby's box in his arms. He was rocking it back and forth. We were all glad to be alive.
The soldier said to your father, "Do you want a boy or a girl?" Your father said, "It doesn't matter, either way." He told your father, "No, you want a boy, so he can fight and take part in the war against us." Your father said, "It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. What matters is that the mother is fine." Then they put the baby in a box, a cartoon. The Israelis took her out of the box because they didn't believe there were no weapons under her.
The Israeli officers came and they said, "You can go now." We went out. And on the way from the hospital, we walked now this time because the cars, we left them there. We walked. On the way, there were so many corpses, soldiers killed. Because it was so hot that each one of them was really, from the sun.
I remember going back to the house. Laith had already gone back with Dad, but I didn't want to go because I didn't want to see any dead bodies or anything like that. But when we went back, there were dead bodies lying around, and there were a lot of dead bodies with piles of dirt on top of them. So that, because I think what was happening was that there were dogs and things that were going and eating the dead bodies and so on, and that was not good. And they couldn't bury all these dead bodies. There were dead bodies, everywhere. So what they would do is they would come along and just dump piles of dirt on them. So you would see a pile of dirt with somebody's hand sticking out of it or somebody's leg sticking out of it. And then there were big holes, in the ground, like these big craters from bombs and things like that. And the whole place was a mess. I mean, the whole thing there was covered with shell casings and unexploded shells.
There was nothing to eat. But one of the women whose house was across the street remembered that they had some pigeons. So somebody went over to the house and got the pigeons and plucked them and cooked them and brought them for me to have something to eat so I could feed the baby. And I ate, and then your dad and Sidi came. And they were chewing on the last bits of bones, out of this soup. Haram. It was hard. And then in the morning, you came to see me. You, Tarek, came to see me. You were just a little boy. And they had given you a little piece of bread, like a little piece of French bread, about 1.5 inches or 2 inches across, and with a little piece of jelly on it. And when you came running in to see me, you dropped your jelly on the floor. It was the saddest look on your face. There wasn't much to eat. Haram. Poor baby.
I joined the Army '66 as a doctor, of course.
I heard that Samir was killed or something.
They didn't know where I was, of course. And I was very worried about them because I can hear the bombing and the planes running around shooting and bombing. And of course, I didn't know what happened to them. They didn't know what happened to me. We had a lot of casualties. I remember putting some of them in an ambulance. 2 ambulances we had. We put them in them and they drove down to the bridge, which, over the Jordan River. And before it got to the bridge, a plane came, a Mirage plane came and rocketed the 2 ambulances. And we lost everybody in the ambulances, everyone.
They said on the way to Amman, some were killed, but nobody knew. So I thought, I'll just have to go and look for him. So I left Jerusalem and went over the bridge, which was destroyed then. I crossed it and I went to Amman looking for Samir.
I was watching television, and on the bridge was hit, broken bridge on the Jordan River. and some refugees came. The first one was coming was your father. I saw him on television, passing through.
Very, very, very little news was coming out. And one day I was sitting actually in the camp when Sari arrived. And when I saw him, as if it was a new life to me, you know. And he just crossed over and came and looked for me and found me.
After the 1967 war, we crossed the destroyed bridge over the Jordan River to join my father. He had crossed earlier to find my uncle Samir and was prevented by the Israelis from returning. In fact, when we crossed, my mother was forced by the Israeli authorities to sign a paper promising that she and her family would never return to Palestine.
There are many, many stories, but you see, the main story remains the most important one. There were many times when, you know, one wondered if things will go back to normal and we go back home. They always had hope, I must say. They always talked about we'll be going home and soon there will be peace and inshallah this will happen. And now that they're talking with the rest of the world about the problem, it might settle down and we'll go back and that. And they died doing that. I met one day a taxi man, you know. I was in a taxi and it happened to be about 2 o'clock. And I said to him, can you put the news on? He said, no, I will not put the news on. I said, why not? He told me my father stayed 30 years in front of the television and the radio, listening to the news, then he died. And I'm not going to do the same. So I'm not going to put the news on. I don't listen to news. His father was hoping to hear good news, but he died before he heard anything. And that's how it is.
From Rumima till Hadassah, it all belonged to Lifta, and most of it belongs to our grandfathers, our mother and father. Yeah. What can we do? This is life. Alhamdulillah, you are here, you are grown up, and alhamdulillah, yani this is the best pleasure we have.
As I'm telling you, really, I'm still waiting. Even if I go to the moon, I'll still be waiting, and I'll come back, I'll go to the moon, and I'll come back, I'll still be waiting, maybe. And that's my life story, more or less.